Well, clearly I don't know how to use the music particularly well, because that's what happens when Paul leaves me to my own devices. That's the one. That's the one. All right. Well, welcome back to the Comic Binge, everybody. This is going to be a pretty exciting episode, I think, just because hopefully you've gone on the journey with us before to dive into the behemoth of a crossover event that was Infinite Crisis, the thing that swallowed up DC Comics for several years and is coming to a head in this event series. And it is really reaching kind of a tipping point now. We have, in terms of the main series, this is around issue number 5, but there's several things surrounding issue number 5 that we're touching on here to get a more well-rounded experience for a couple of characters that I don't know. Maybe some people had absorbed them a lot, maybe not. But I'm going to be interested to talk about this with our panelists. So, speaking of which, panel-wise, right now it's only two of us. I am Chris Clow, one of the co-hosts of the Comic Binge. Paul Herman will be joining us shortly. But joining me for this episode, as he has for all of the other Infinite Crisis binges that we've gone on thus far, Nico Caruso. How you doing, Nico?
Dude, I'm doing fantastic. Even better now that we got things going here. So excited to talk about these. Excited to continue this this part of the DC universe overall. Like I've said, if you just watch this for the first time, I've read the main story of Infinite Crisis in the past, but this is my first time diving into everything around it, and it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. So actually, before we start diving into the individual issues that we're going to talk about, why don't you refresh people who are going to be watching this and me, frankly, on because I remember you saying you had read the main series a while ago, but it didn't include a lot of the tie-in material. So, what has your experience been as we've gone on this journey with a lot of this extraneous tie-in material?
Yeah, great question. So it's only heightened it 1,000,000% because when I first read this, I was really young. I always joke about this with my father when he's on with us. Unfortunately, he couldn't be on the show tonight, but I tried reading the story very young. And of course, it's so dense. And I was just, I think, happy to be reading comics. I was like, 10 or 11 when this story came out. So then when I revisited, I did get a lot out of the main series, but in going back and reading all the stuff leading up to it and all these extra tie-in issues, um, like you said, it is a behemoth. It is so dense, and to get some of that extra information, but also to spend time with characters I have not read a lot of, whether it be, it was Ted Kord's Blue Beetle at the beginning. It's a lot of Superman and Wonder Woman stuff, which I've really only ever read when they're in Justice League stories or when they're crossing over with other heroes. So to read some of their single issues and see how the writers tackle them and all that jazz, it's been really great stuff. And I've been able to say on the last couple of shows, this is some of my favorite DC stuff I ever read because, and I really now see why you recommended all this because it's a pretty powerful story from a thematic standpoint, and it really gives a lot more depth and weight to these characters, and that's something I enjoy, and obviously you do significantly as well for wanting to recommend this story to us. Is it's challenging really the DC universe as a whole in a pretty remarkable way, and I think the characters are all the better for it.
Yeah, I know. I'm obviously I'm inclined to agree with you, but I think this episode is going to be particularly interesting just because the actual main event series of any comic book crossover. It doesn't just apply to this one, but it certainly applies to this one as well. It has to hit so many different beats and to tell so many different. It has to address a lot of hanging threads that have been established both in the actual event series and in other titles. And sometimes those thematic aims, you might be surprised at how those coalesce in the tie-in material. Not every major tie-in can always fulfill that promise, but I think this one did, particularly in a three-part story that we will talk about here shortly. But before we actually get to some of the other bigger stuff, The first issue on this binge was Teen Titans number 32. And the reason that I picked this one is because there is a pretty big beat near the very end of Infinite Crisis that involves Connor Kent. So it seemed like a good idea to maybe familiarize this panel with some of the turmoil that he's going through, how his story interacts not only with some of the main characters in Infinite Crisis itself, but also with long-standing DC icons. Obviously, Superman is a given, but Lex Luthor is also a really big part of it too. And Luthor has his own parts to play when it comes to Infinite Crisis. Uh, Nico, give me an idea. And of course, shout out to Nick. We're really sorry
Yes.
that Nick couldn't be here for this one, but
Abs-
he will be joining us on the next one, and we're looking forward to having him back, of course. But Nico, tell me about your experience before reading this when it came to Connor Kent specifically. And what was it like going on this issue that is very much adjacent to the events of Infinite Crisis number 4 when Connor throws down with Superboy Prime?
Yeah. So first of all, it adds a lot to that issue in general, um, because there's definitely massive parallels between the two of them, right? And especially in some of the pre stuff we read, the little inklings of Superboy that we get, is going on his own journey. So it was cool to see that. I have not much experience with Connor Kent outside of the Teen Titan stuff I've read with him, or other times, once again, he's appeared in stories. I would say my biggest attachment to him is probably on the Titans television series. That's probably the most I've ever time I spent with Superboy, which is a little over 2.5 seasons of TV. So this was cool to get to know him a lot better. And then it's really interesting because this idea of what's happening between these two characters happens in a very similar manner with two different characters in the later issues we're going to talk about, and how these two characters are at the center of it is very interesting. And it's funny because how Superboy Prime views Connor is very interesting in what he is, and having those Lex Luthor parts to him. It's I think it's a fair concern, I believe. Of course, Superboy Prime's actions and the whole story in general is one thing, but to focus on that part of Connor Kent and want to combat that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm also, I debated whether or not before we jumped into the main series, we should actually focus on the story in which, I mean, this cover here, it says Superboy is back. Well,
Mhm.
what's he back from? They allude to that in some of the early issues of Infinite Crisis, where Lex actually basically took control of Connor and caused him to seriously hurt the people that he loves the most, namely the
Mhm.
Teen Titans. And there's one Titan in particular that he really doesn't want to hurt. I mean, he loves them all to varying degrees, but Cassie Sandsmark is certainly at the top of the list.
Mhm.
I think it's fair to say, as we'll explore a little bit more in the next issue. But I the first time I read Johns' Teen Titans, I remember I think it was 2007 when I first started absorbing it. I was working at an ice cream store
Love
that
it.
nobody came into. So I
Oh,
had a lot of
I'm
time to
sorry.
kill. No, it's okay because I had a lot of time to kill, and I would usually kill it reading comics. I remember, like I brought my Absolute edition of Watchmen in there and plowed
Beautiful.
through that. That was where I had read Crisis on Infinite Earths for the first time since I was a kid, and I didn't get it when I was a kid, but I certainly understood it as a 19-year-old. Um, so absorbing Teen Titans, I did not expect to care about characters much beyond Tim Drake.
Mhm.
And much to my surprise and delight, the one I probably ended up caring about the most was Connor Kent.
Mhm.
Because the first issue really ends with him discovering what his true parentage is. They'd laid some hints about it, in the death of Superman, and that's something that is recounted in the next issue that we'll talk about. But it really did create this strong thematic dichotomy between the world's greatest hero and the world's greatest villain. I thought that was just such a a rich thing to explore and leave it to Jeff Johns to run with like a
Mhm.
primary idea and push it forward. So I fell in love with Connor, and it was a really gratifying reading experience. So going into this, because the first time I read the main Infinite Crisis series, I didn't touch the Titans issues, very much like you. I just,
Mhm.
I read the main series, and I think I had read the Batman stuff and some of the stuff that came out around the same time, and left it at that. So when I actually read Johns's Teen Titans sequentially, I went back and revisited this stuff, and it really does add to this sort of sense of duty and responsibility that he has developed over the course of 30 issues by this point. He alludes to the idea, I think, near or on this page, that he didn't like crypto. Like he would stay in
Yeah.
Smallville because he didn't really have anywhere else to go by the time this series started, and he didn't really like being there because it was small, and growing up in a really small farm town, I related to that.
Mhm.
Um, but he grew to love it because of the people and of the loyalty displayed by the Kents, and certainly by the dog, uh, Superman's best friend. So it was just a really charming experience to go on, in addition to the cool stories that Teen Titans told. So having everything come to a head, and giving Connor such an important part in this moment, was pretty cool. I'm led to believe, and he can't speak for himself yet, so I'll ask him when he gets here. But I'm led to believe that Paul wasn't crazy about the stuff with Connor. So I'm gonna have to pop a
Interesting.
right, and
Mhm.
try to knock
Oh,
some sense.
yeah. Yeah, try to knock some sense into him.
Little bit, yeah. But either way, I mean, it was just such a, like, this issue running in parallel to what we saw in Infinite Crisis number
Yeah.
4. I think it was a cool idea.
Especially because I was, when I saw and what's funny is I realized that was happening, but then I saw that flash part happen again. I'm like, "Didn't I read this?" I'm like, "Oh, that's right. It's directly parallel." It's just
Yeah,
so much happens on the page, especially of those main issues where you're like, there's so many characters and things happening. But I one thing, and that's you bring up a really interesting piece about Connor when you really think about it. At the end of the day, it is the world's greatest hero with the world's greatest villain, and what an idea. And just him, and they actually are touching on this very idea in the show Titans as well. So it's that made me reflect when I was reading these pages, and
cool.
that's just such a strong idea. And it's and the beauty of it too is the side that always seems to shine through is the side from the world's greatest hero, which
Yeah,
is always just wonderful.
of course. And there's some cool moments in Titans as well, in the series. I mean, the
Mhm,
comic book series, where as a clone, Connor's not sure that he even has a soul,
mhm,
and you're led to believe initially that he doesn't, because Raven is obviously someone who'd be able to tell. And but there's a really great moment in a few issues before this where he convenes with Raven, and she shows him his soul. And she just says it only recently uh, asserted itself. It's a soul, it's yours, you created it, and it's beautiful. And pretty solid moment. And then you also get to see, like, this spread here where you
oh,
have
this is a beautiful one.
the Titans, the Doom Patrol, and the JSA all coming to his aid, and he's like surprised that he has friends in such high places.
Mhm.
But it's just kind of a cool, gratifying moment, I think, for him to realize that. Yeah, so I mean, I like this issue. Todd Knock on pencils, I know that sometimes he's not everybody's favorite, but I think he gets the emotion through really strongly. So I was a fan. But any final thoughts on this issue before we move on?
No, I'm really glad you chose it to kick things off here because, like I said, it gives some much appreciated extra context, but it's just adds more layers, and it gave me at least some more time with Connor Kent on the pages than I've had. So
Sure. Yeah.
solid stuff.
And also cool to see that Roy Harper stole a Phantom Zone
Oh yeah,
arrow
just
from
of course
before
there's a
the
Phantom
Power
Zone
Group,
arrow.
because of course he did.
Of
It's
course.
funny, and it's funny even to think about how shortly after this, in the 1 year later stuff, Roy actually becomes a fully fledged member of the Justice League, and he's a
Hmm.
pretty solid one too. So
Wonderful.
anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the next issue in the binge after Teen Titans number 32 is Teen Titans Annual number 1. So the thing that I remember just going head over heels for this issue the first time
Mhm.
that I read it, just because it is very much it feels like an infringement of the conflict onto every facet of life. It touches on what most of the Titans are doing to try and keep things under control in Bloodhaven after Chemo was dropped and basically bombed the city into oblivion. While this romance between Connor and Cassie hits a fever pitch, all while the involvement of Wonder Woman and Superman and Lex Luthor are just kind of around things and permeating what all of the characters are doing. And Superman has direct involvement in a couple of like nice events, a couple of little key pivotal moments. But I thought that the title for this, Love and War, was very appropriate. And Marv Wolfman assisted on the plotting for this, which I thought was kind of a cool idea and also appropriate given Wolfman's importance to the new Teen Titans and how much
Mhm.
that series, it has legendary status for good reason. But this one also kind of recounts some of Connor's origin stories, and it kind of melds together what we had seen from him in the death of Superman up through the early issues of Johns' Teen Titans in a way that is streamlined and makes sense, very much like Johns had done in Infinite Crisis, recounting all the various crises that had happened in DC's history up to that point. But a very personal story and a strange look at the, I guess, love that Lex Luthor has for whomever he sees as his son. So it's this one's kind of loaded, I thought, and this is just the first few pages. This is before we get into some of the other quieter stuff. What did you make of the way this one kicked off?
Definitely loaded is the perfect way to see it. Reverend's preaching here, as always, in the best way possible. But no, this is probably these opening pages, and this doesn't mean I don't dislike the rest of the issue, but these opening pages and the stuff with Lex is my favorite part of the issue, especially and once again on the artwork here, being able to show that emotion is when Lex actually shows some anger, like where was Superman during it all? Um, you're right. It's such an interesting sign of love because that is love there in a way, and coming from Lex Luthor,
It's
and
Very Vader-ish,
it
isn't it?
was, it was, and it's to even get the depth from Lex of what he really was trying to do with this individual in front of him. It starts it off pretty damn heavy, and it gives you a lot to think about and reflect on, knowing the and having it show, of course, in a very subtle way that little origin of Connor there in general. So this is some of my favorite stuff in it because we just talked about how the signs of the world's greatest hero is normally what comes out in Connor Kent, but to just see Lex analyze him and describe him like that, and then to the Titans turn around and show some genuine frustration at the circumstances and to question that world's greatest hero was mm, chilling stuff.
Yeah, Robin goes through some things in this one. Not only is he confronted with the debilitating injuries suffered by his best friend in Connor, but he has to tell off both Lex Luthor and Superman in the course of a
Mhm.
single issue. And the Titans are very much, they're carrying a heavy burden. We get to see Superman show up briefly while they're on the streets of Bloodhaven, but uh, it's Robin who really takes charge of things, and he tells Superman that, hey, we need leaders on the ground here, and I don't see anybody else stepping up, so I think it should be me. And it's an extraordinary show of confidence in Tim Drake all of our friends who are Tim Drake fans should certainly take heart in how much Superman has confidence in him. In the middle of, like, the word crisis gets overused probably in this context, but it is very much a crisis within a crisis in terms of an entire major city that has been debilitated by effectively a giant bomb being dropped into the middle of it. So to see Superman express that confidence in him, I love what it says about Tim in not only in confronting both Lex Luthor and Superman, but the contrast that it draws between Superman and Lex, because it's this one guy, it's Robin, who is confronting them both, and you see the very, very different outlooks that they both have in the course of a single issue, in something that they don't even directly face off in. So pretty heavy stuff.
It's you wore the best shirt tonight, I'll say. It's very appropriate because you're right, hell of a Robin moment and hell of a Tim Drake moment in particular. I love the panels down there when it's someone has to take charge, so that's what we're gonna do. It's frustrating just to see him, and like you said, to see him stand up to both Superman and Lex Luthor. I've seen some cool Tim Drake moments in the comic books, but I gotta add this one to the list because you're right. It says a lot about Tim, and some of his obviously what he's thinking about doing, what he feels like he has to do is what he would draw from his mentor per se. But at the same time, the Robin mantle is always able to do things in a little bit of a different way and mean something a little bit different than the bat does. So to see Tim step up like this is wonderful, and yes, pun intended. Boy, wonderful.
Boy, wonderful. And I mean, I'm probably a little bit biased, but Johns gives Tim a lot of those moments. The issues that follow this after Infinite Crisis in the 1 year later stuff, Tim has to step up in a whole new way that I think is pretty fascinating. I don't think those issues tend to get as much attention as the stuff pre-Infinite Crisis, because there are a couple of major members of the roster that aren't on the team by that point. But he really does apply a maturity to Tim that a lot of other creators hadn't, and even a sense of destiny to Tim. Like, a common refrain over the course of like the first 30 issues of Teen Titans is that it's Tim Drake's destiny to overtake Batman as the world's greatest detective. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And that's something that I certainly appreciate. Oh, wow, Nick. Well, hey, you know what? Dick Grayson's going to get some love in this binge pretty
Oh
soon.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Pretty soon. So, I mean, I think I've said before, Dick Grayson is my personal favorite Robin. So your love is not misplaced, but I don't want to discount Timmy Drake, as you said.
Yeah, don't show this to Rob Myers, Eddie. He's not going to be pleased to see you telling him to go eat his cookies and milk. But, Chris, I love how you bring up about how John. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, sir.
How you doing, Mr. Baby?
What's up, man? How are you? It's a hell of a jacket you got.
I didn't say it at all until
I know. Yeah, that's true.
Got in here. I didn't do it. So.
You don't like your nickname?
No, I do.
It's an amazing
come from you. It just has to come from you.
Everyone can embrace Mr. Baby.
It just has to come from you.
You've seen Swingers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, like enough said. Beautiful baby. Beautiful baby. I mean, come on. Like, you should embrace that. Mr. Baby. Come on. Like, it's beautiful baby.
I wear it proudly, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone for letting me come in late. I had to take care of some stuff real quick, which is not like me usually. But as Chris knows, if I have to miss something if I'm not on time, it means something serious came up. So I had to.
Everything's cool. Okay, cool.
Everything's totally fine. I just had to take care of something real quick. So everything's good. So I apologize for interrupting your guys' conversations here. So anyway.
before I throw it to Paul, Nico, finish your thought. What were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I love that you bring up that how Johns matures Tim in a lot of this stuff, because not only do I agree, I love when stories like this, when you do see the characters mature in it. And the best recent example I could give, if anyone's just recently seen Wakanda Forever, one thing I'm particularly blown away by is the arc they give Shuri in the film, not only from the film start to finish, but when you think about when we first met her, the kind of role she had, and the role not only she played for Wakanda, but just her own maturity, and to see where she is by the end of Wakanda Forever is remarkable. So I love that it's an event like this and a writer like Jeff Johns who allowed you're right, Chris, for Tim Drake to progress. One of my biggest frustrations in comics is when I feel like characters stay the same for too long. And I do believe in some of these. Yes, there's characters who always, maybe the very prime ones at the top, the ones who aren't allowed to age as much, they kind of feel the same, even though you do cool things around it. But particularly for some of the legacy characters, in this case, like Tim Drake, when you think of people like Grayson, like Wally West, like Roy, even, they're allowed to grow up and progress as human beings in the pages. And I love that it's something like this where Tim Drake has to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Well,
Yeah.
Paul,
you.
we've moved on from the first one, but give your brief impressions of Teen Titans 32 before we jump back into the discussion of the annual.
Well, I just wanted to say that again before we I had to get interrupted there. I really wanted to, when we did a little crosstalk before we do our thing. No, I really wanted to say that when I got into this binge, I took it as we were just going to do the main series and just whatever, right? And when Papa Nick and Mr. Baby agreed to continue on and go deeper, which again, I'm super bummed Papa Nick couldn't make it.
Yeah.
So sir, if you're listening, or if you're gonna listen, we miss you. We'll get you next time. And
He'll be back.
Yeah. I love conversation. Obviously, Mr. Baby, you make up for almost everything, but your dad's one of a kind gentleman.
He's a legend, man. He's a legend. I know.
I love him. I love him. Papa Nick, you're awesome.
I'm doing as good as I can out here, gentlemen.
You're doing great. You're doing great. No, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was just when like we agreed to do the deeper dive. I'm used to just kind of some a lot of the crossover material being very just thin and just kind of whatever. And some things were stronger than others, but I was not prepared for, I think, the emotional upheaval that I was going to be getting from this binge. And for people who are doing the binge with us, or kind of just kind of if they're listening, from whatever, just kind of hearing us for talk about it, and just kind of they're curious what they think. I come from Marvel, where in DC, I haven't read too many DC things, but like as far as crossover events. But with crossover events from Marvel, they're hit and miss, and I'm sure DC is no different. But the one thing I would say is that it's very hard for me to find multiple series where the crossovers they do hit kind of hard. I will admit the Teen Titans stuff didn't hit me as hard, but that being said, I did like the issue 32 we're talking about. So it was cool to see. The one thing I would say that I wasn't as a fan of, and this is the problem with, I think, mainstream comics, is that like when you crossovers, you kind of you try to bleed into a little bit more like, how do I get these people invested in my comic who are reading for the crossover, and there's stuff in here I'm like, I don't care about Doom Patrol and like what this whole thing is. Like, obviously this is getting, I mean, I care about it, but as a reader reading the story, I don't care about it.
I mean, it's a little bit of a detour. Yeah, it is.
Right. But see, this is the problem people have in mainstream comics. It's not so solely focused. It's like, bleh. And again, it's a strength and a weakness, right? But that being said, I did like seeing Connor grow up. It felt like finally in these two issues we read, especially I think the first one. And yeah, I did like it. I did like seeing like the fallout from it, and it was cool to see the perspective of this cross. And I will say that it's been pretty well organized as far as what they've done. Because I had to go back. Obviously, it's been a while since we read the issue 4. But reading issue 4 is issue 4. We had last one we read. It was issue, we read issue 5.
But
I had to go back.
But this issue takes place at the same time as issue number 4.
Right. And so it was interesting to see that. It was interesting to see that kind of like dichotomy between everything. And so
it's like playing the Shadows of the Empire game and reading the book. And getting two different perspectives and reading.
Exactly.
That game. The game was
tight. Yeah, word. No, I liked the issue. It was interesting. So yeah. I liked seeing the team kind of like, we just saw like one of our most powerful people just get rocked, you know, and like, what does this mean? And how just a perspective of, I think, what it puts you in at that time. Yeah. Like, and seeing like, you know, Superboy just get rocked. There's, you know, cause we see that parallel later on, right. With, you know, with the 2 Superman. So it's interesting. And I didn't even think about that just till now. Like, oh man, it's a total parallel of like, you have Superboy versus Superboy and Superman versus Superman, and how different those fights are. Right.
Yeah.
One is pure insecurity. One is out of outright like survive, like you know, survival mode, right? So it's super interesting, the different like parallels between, they're opposites, but they're like almost like the opposites of the same coin. So
yeah,
anyway, I did like the issue for sure.
Cool. Well, and when it comes to the annual, one of the things that Nico and I were talking about before you jumped on was how Vader-ish Lex Luthor is in terms of expressing his love for his son. Nico is pretty clear. It is a form of love.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And I would probably agree with that, but he definitely shows it in a weird, backhanded kind of way.
Yeah.
But what did you think of these first pages with Lex kind of communing with Connor while he's recuperating?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
You know, this was interesting because I need you to kind of fill in. And again, this is where my DC brain. I know that the redheaded Luthor is not the same as this Luthor, correct?
No, it is.
It is? Okay. This is where it gets confusing for me because
his first body had died already. His second body.
Whoa!
This might be worth jumping into at some point, you know, with the burn, the end of the burn, like beginning of Jurgens and Roger Stern kind of stuff. But either way, so this Lex Luthor was present for the death of Superman. And then, you know, he just ended up losing his hair again.
But the redheaded one was like an ally.
He presented himself as an ally.
Okay, so he was really just pretending.
He was
or whatever.
Luthor. Yeah. I mean,
right. Okay, got you.
Yeah. But just in terms of it's you're my son, you should have been stronger, but I'm gonna save you because I love you. But also, why didn't you do this? And also, where was Superman? This is his fault. This would never have happened if I had gotten the chance to kill him. You know.
See, and I like that. See, this issue was probably my least favorite of all of them. Just because I think the stuff at the end with him and Wonder Girl is not my. We'll get that in a second.
We'll get into that short.
Okay. But I did like this. I like this fact because I was a little confused. But I did like the fact I figured Lex obviously had something to do with Superboy, this version of Lex. I didn't know if there was 2 different versions or whatever. But I did like this. I did like what you just brought up, the fact that it's like, oh, how does he twist this back to get Superman? Like that was cool. Like it stays true to his like, oh, I have created a Superboy, but it's not like Superman wasn't there to save you. He should have been because he's Superman. I was cool. It's classic Lex Luthor, but yeah, this is the better stuff of the issue for sure.
Yeah. Well, Nico, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's well said.
All right. Well, let's move on into and we of course just talked about Tim Drake having to be the guy that tells off both Superman and Lex Luthor in the course of a single issue.
Mr. Baby.
Oh geez.
In my defense, it's not Donna or Yara Zeddy, so it's you're onto something with the mantle, but not all the way.
I'm not a blonde guy, so I can I understand.
Okay. Keep it in your pants, gentlemen.
It's well,
So
it's well in there, sir.
okay, all right. Like a turtle. Okay. Um,
That's one way of saying it. Yeah, Mr. Baby, don't get old. That's all I gotta say.
oh, good Lord. What happened? What
I
happened?
hijacked it. Anyway,
Anyway,
I hijacked my own show, Chris. Oh, anyway.
you're like, yeah, okay. Anyway,
Anyway.
so the romance stuff. It doesn't surprise me, Paul, that this
Yeah.
didn't hit as hard for you because honestly, jumping into the series at this point where Johns is nearing the end of his time on Teen Titans. I think he was like the main writer through 44, if I'm remembering correctly. It's okay, Nick. Don't worry about it.
Rev.
I'm used to it.
Love it. Love it, by
But
the way.
this is really kind of a culmination of what has been set up since the beginning of the
Okay.
series. And honestly, probably going back to people who read Young Justice, where these characters first
Yeah,
met.
that's certainly the impression I got. And that's another thing. It's always weird to me that how you don't have to go super deep into this, but do they explain the difference between Young Justice and Teen Titans? I know there's a difference, and it's kind of obvious, but
Yeah,
it's
so just briefly, a brief aside, before John started his run on Teen Titans, there was actually a mini, like a 3-issue mini, I think, called Titans Young Justice Graduation Day that kind of talked, it was like the transition from the team going from Young Justice to a new version of the Teen Titans.
Oh, okay.
And the beginning of Johns' series actually, like Robin is uncomfortable. He says the Titans is Nightwing's thing. I don't want to be a part of the Titans. It doesn't seem like it's appropriate. And Batman is just basically saying, look, I want you to be with your friends. So you should create and the cool thing about Johns' Titans is that Cyborg and Starfire and Beast Boy return from like the traditional new Teen Titans lineup to kind of serve as mentors to the former Young Justice heroes, particularly Robin, Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, and Superboy. So it does feel like a legacy team in a way that Young Justice certainly didn't. And it probably feels like a more legitimate version of the Teen Titans than we saw like in the 1990s, for instance. So it's just a cool series, and it's John's. You know, he
I love
came
John.
in.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah,
read Teen Titans eventually for
he
sure.
came in. Johns is a new Teen Titans disciple, so he comes into it with the intent to really make the team heavy hitters in the DCU, and he absolutely does that right out of the gate with Deathstroke, Brother Blood. Paul, you read that issue with Jason Todd shortly after Red Hood
Very
made
good.
his return to the DCU, and then it all culminates here. And the thing that I think I love about like this page in particular, these kids, they're kids. We have to remember they're kids. Like it's really easy to forget that.
18-year-old ain't kids to me. They're adults.
Well, they might be. They could be 18, but they might not be either. I mean, they're Teen Titans after all.
I
But
interpret these people as
still,
adults.
even if they're, I have a hard time seeing 18-year-olds as adults. Personally, it's just a
I do
bias
too.
that I
I mean,
have.
I'll be honest. I'm just.
I didn't see myself
a
as an adult
dickwad.
when I was 18.
I
So
did. I thought I was old as hell.
well,
I
you
know.
and I have a difference of perspective.
Yeah, we definitely do. That's one way of putting it.
Just the idea of getting away from all of the chaos, I
Yeah,
thought was something that is just a
that was
very
nice.
human
Yeah,
and very, it's a kid thing to do. Like you want to be able to be a kid at times. And I appreciated that, but it was also just like the culmination of the relationship up to this moment. There is a consummation that appears to take place.
yeah, that's
Um,
weird. I'm sorry. It's just,
is it
call me
though?
call
Is
me a
it?
prude. Call me a prude.
No,
But
no,
I
no,
think
man.
sex and this stuff
It's
is
like
so
that joke
weird.
from Independence Day. It's that joke from Independence Day. This might be our last night on Earth. You don't want
Kind
to
of,
die a
yeah,
virgin, do
dude.
you?
It's weird, man.
It's
I'm
not
sorry.
weird.
It
I
feels
think that
weird.
it's also the like the mall rats, the plane going down, same thing.
Yeah,
Kind of,
I
you know?
don't know about that, but
I do
you
see
good.
the perspective that it is weird. I also do see it as a really nice. I was going to use a word, but I'm glad I didn't. It's a normal. It's a nice, like Chris, a culmination of I think their romance
No,
in the
that's a good
issue.
point. Yeah,
And I'm a sucker for a solid romance. Sometimes I am.
for
I mean,
sure. I
call me
get
a
it.
hopeless romantic, but even though I'm not as familiar with Cassie, I bought their relationship. And what's up, Chris Evans?
Yeah,
I
Chris
really
Evans.
bought their relationship and Chris, you bring up something that I didn't even really think about when I read this issue the first time. Is just to get away from all the war and all the craziness and the darkness for a sec, to show them both really just be kids, both just be humans, right? Um, was really cool. And once again, it gave me more with Connor Kent that I've ever had. So it was cool to peel back some of those layers and really let this relationship unfold a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you hear stories before a soldier goes off to war. I mean, there was something about it that to me just did feel very human to find this
For sure.
moment of
Yeah.
connection away from the insanity. This is something that's been building for a long time. And, romances and superhero stories for me don't always hit very well. You could argue that it's kind of an underserved component of a lot of superhero stories, at least in comics, in most comics.
Well, yeah,
But
especially it's crazy to think now that manga is hitting huge with romance.
mm,
And I consider manga basically just comic books. It's not the same, not
yeah,
American. And it's crazy that they have hit this, but for whatever reason, American comics haven't an audiences, or at least no, because I would disagree with my own self, because the audiences in America are loving manga romance comics, but then for whatever reason, American companies or American creators can't, or for the most part, as far as I know, haven't been able to crack the code as well as manga has. So
well, and I think it gives
I think you're
comic
right,
book
though.
readers a bad rep in the sense that like they are against romance, and obviously at this time, men were predominantly reading these stories in far greater numbers than women
Yeah.
were, and they probably still are, but I think the gap is closed a lot.
Oh,
But
sure.
I think people are just into good stories, and if a good story deals with a romance, then that shouldn't be off limits.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that we lose by just jumping into this annual is that Johns had spent like 30 some odd issues building up what this relationship was like. But at the same time, I still felt like it was an important chapter for reasons that will become clearer later. But also, too, is just like, of course, the Kents are cool with it,
Yeah.
right? Like they're just cool. Like it doesn't they're not they don't shame anybody. They don't talk down to Connor, or they don't talk down to Cassie. She's welcome to stay as long as she wants to. They all get along. They all eat breakfast together. There's something just really sweet about that, especially considering what is coming next. And what is coming next is going to be very difficult for everybody. And during all of this insanity, you still have the Titans on the ground, exhausted in Bloodhaven. But we spent a lot of time on this. I know we're going to go overtime just because there's a lot to get through.
Let's just go for it. Let's just go.
Yeah, I know. So that brings us to Infinite Crisis number 5. So I actually debated having Infinite Crisis number 5 run last, because I think technically in the reading order, the story that we read next came out before Infinite Crisis number 5 did. But I felt like it was valuable to absorb this conflict first, to just put the events together after the fact, to know how the fight went down, but then to see how things go deeper. And we'll get into that with the final 3 issues. But this is really
Well, you could.
I mean,
Well,
oh,
I'm sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to interrupt. I
no,
apologize.
go ahead. Look,
So I was going to say, to be honest, and Mr. Baby, you can tell me if I'm out of control here. I kind of feel like, and this is why I think you did a great job of actually, I'm glad you made me read these comics all together, because I actually think issue
likewise.
5 and the next 3 issues they actually go well, like perfectly together. Like, I think you could, to be honest, I think we could probably talk about all 4 of them together as one entity. And I don't mean that for time purposes. I mean that strictly as like, because you did a good job of coordinating this, it actually fits really well. Because I remember when I read those first 2 issues with the Titans, I was like, okay, cool, crossover stuff, solid, good, solid crossover stuff, but not like whatever. And then I got to issue 5, read issue 5. I'm like, okay, and like, sorry, and I'm really, by the way, for those who don't know, I'm loving Infinite Crisis.
Mm.
You were 100% on the money. A dog's drinking water. The thing is, when I read this issue, I had to go back a little bit again. Like, okay, what happened last issue? Which is not a problem. I know you wish we could get done sooner, but I think this is still fine. And I read, I'm like, okay, cool. And then I read that issue and went, oh, okay, that's heavy. And then I read the issues afterwards. I was like, oh shit. And I was like, damn. So I just want to say, I think we could talk about it all at once. And I don't want to steal anyone's thunder here, especially you, obviously yours, Chris. But I for one, just want to say that I was really happy you made me do this, because I thought these were really well done. And not only were they really well done, crazy, they were written by different writers. And for the most part, because Joe Kelly wrote 2 of them and Jeff Loeb wrote 1, but Jeff Johns is obviously the architect of all this. The fact that they all go seemingly into this fallout from issue 5 of Infinite Crisis, I thought was really impressive, to be honest. Excuse me. I love seeing the Earth, the Superman Earth 2, because again, I vaguely remember him from Infinite Crisis, or excuse me, Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Crisis 1.
Thank you. Crisis 1. And which I need to reread that because I love that story so much. But going back into there, it's
masterpiece.
This is what's crazy. This is not like this is not as good, but it's like in this ballpark. It's super good. It's super good. I love the fact we're getting the what makes Earth 2 Superman work, and it's not just a variation, right? Because so many times these multiverse characters, they're variations. Like even Superboy Earth Prime is a variation ish. He's not like, there's not a lot to him. He's, as far as like, what makes him tick and makes him interesting, he's just like, I'm angry. Bah! Like, I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's what he is. And that's not bad. Yeah, exactly. It's not a bad thing. The difference is Earth 2 Superman has way more complexity, way more of an interesting, different take that is, it's not just, it's a variation of Superman, but it's also like that it takes that idea of like, well, what makes Superman tick, right? Or not tick, but what if you were Superman, what would you actually stop war kind of an idea, right? Like the whole Dr. Manhattan kind of concept, and takes it not to that degree, because I think that's a very much it's almost too realistic. This brings it back to a little bit more of that comic book reality, but also sets into the fact that like Superman's just, it's not going to be the same, principles. It's going to be modified and different and have repercussions from it. Right. And you see that through these 3 issues. I was really impressed. I thought this was like, damn, they made me care about Earth 2 Superman, which I didn't really care about. I didn't think I was going to care about any of these variations, to be honest. And now I'm like, okay, I get now the hubbub about this version of Superman, because I remember he joins GSA later on, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy? What is this? Now I'm like, okay, there is some kind of redemption factor that we get, and we see the seeds of it, of why and where and where power can go wrong. Where again, that whole hell is paved with good intentions, whatever, road to hell, what, et cetera, et cetera. This is that, but even it's not even the road to hell. It's like bad things happen, and I didn't mean it for it to happen, but I let them. And to see that trigger of when Superman tells him, like, this is the world was perfect, they wouldn't need me, and how this blows his mind. And when I read it the first time, Chris, and I'll pass it to you, Mr. Baby, after I'm done, I was like, what? Okay, I guess. Like, I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay. And I think and I guess it's kind of a backhanded compliment. I didn't really feel the significance until I read those 3 issues. And I think it's a little bit of a criticism on the book itself of the 5th issue of Infinite Crisis. That being said, I still got it for the most part, what they were saying, but to see it lived out in those 3 issues, chef's kiss. I thought it was beautiful. Mr. Baby, what was your take on that?
I can never reread Infinite Crisis now without reading these after the 5th issue, because I agree, Paul, they gloriously add to that conflict. And you're right, it gives so much more weight to Earth 2 Superman and what he's doing, and you really get an emotional buy-in. I did. And the way to the creativity too in the writing and the art, how they show their 2 stories, and when they fight, it's like a knock into each other's life. And when the dialogue starts to parallel and it all comes together at the end, and just to see one Superman operate in such black and gray is very interesting to me. And like you said, it adds so much more to what Superman says when if the world was perfect, it wouldn't need me. And just the changing art. And it's funny, I was reading the beginning of the last issue, and you know how you do that thing where sometimes you read and you like kind of slightly question if you're following it, because I'm like, well, they were fighting. What am I? Oh yeah, oh that's right. And then it ends, and you're like, my God, right? In such a beautiful fashion. It's one of those. At least I get. I feel like I have like reader anxiety, where like I almost am that type of reader who's like sometimes I'm not. I have to remember that sometimes there is an end of a like there's an end of an issue, there's an end of a story for a reason. Because I was going through it, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is awesome. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, like just the
You forget it's
way
gonna end.
you forget that like that's how we even got here, and then it hits so well. And that's the beauty of the page turn. And I think we talked about this. I don't remember if we talked about this on the Spider-Man show or if it was the last episode of Infinite Crisis here, but with comics too, with those pages, you get to take in the story for as much time as you want. You know,
Exactly.
it's like when you watch film or show, yes, you can pause, but it's not the same because it has to keep moving.
You can't ruminate or not is it ruminate? Is that the word I'm thinking of?
Yeah. Ruminate, marinate.
Yeah.
Any
Marinate.
eight
That's
words,
more of a
eight
marinate.
words. Yeah, I'm sure there's more
all
eight
those
words to add. But yeah, a hell of a 3 issues. And I'm glad you agree with that, Paul.
Really, Chris, I have a question for both of you, actually, especially you for Chris. So really quick, I'll throw it to you after we're done, Chris. But I'm curious, Mr. Baby and Chris, Reverend here. It almost feels like issue 5, in my opinion, should have been a double-sized like issue and throw not everything from those issues, but a lot of it you could have put into that issue, almost like a la Dr. Manhattan, that issue where is his like he's thinking backwards and forwards, or mostly backwards, whatever, in time. And it's like it's almost it could have done it that way because like you said, Mr. Baby, the art style differences are almost help the story, whereas
significantly,
it adds to like the throwback. I feel it could have done that, and I think they could have charged more. And I don't think people would have complained, maybe initially, but after they read it, they would be like, "Oh, this is rad," because it does flesh out so much. I do think it's such a requirement and such a necessity. They should have put it in the comic issue 5 itself. A lot of, not everything verbatim, but go ahead, Chris.
One of the things we talked about at the top of the show before you jumped in was just how much real estate people have when they're telling that main story. You know, there's only so many different places and different characters that they can touch on, but that's what the tie-in material is for. You know, if you want to go thematically deeper on characters that you might appreciate more than some others that are featured in the main series, then you can jump into the tie-in stuff. I don't disagree with you. I mean, I don't think that it would have been a wrong move necessarily after Infinite Crisis number 5, or maybe after number 4, to say, hey, you should go here next. Before you come back for Infinite Crisis number 5, check out these 3 issues. But there's also a greater degree of significance to these 3 issues that I don't think you would get if it was a part of like the actual main story, because this is for all intents and purposes, the final issue of Superman Volume 2 in number 226.
See, I noticed that too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's the last issue of the series that John Byrne started. And it's Adventures of Superman number 649, which is the original numbering for Superman Volume 1, reassumes the numbering with 650. So you go Adventures of Superman 649, Superman Volume 1 650 the next month with the 1 year later stuff. And then it's the last Action Comics issue before the 1 year later event. So this is kind of designed to be probably not on the same level as Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow by Alan Moore and Kurt Swan, but it's like a send-off to a generation of Superman stories. And when it's looked at through that lens, I think it hits it out of the park, precisely because it is that, you know, the conflict, the ideological conflict between Earth 2 Superman and Earth 1 Superman that is hinted at in the main series is just fully unpacked over the course of these three issues. And you see, I mean, maybe it's a Rorschach test for different people, but I see the brutality of simplicity for people who might have
Well said.
a very simplistic moral outlook. You're refusing to recognize some moral nuances that can come from that. And that is exemplified by what Earth 2 Superman wants to do to the world. And the cool thing about these three issues as well is that you get to see what each one would do in the other's place.
It's so good.
And what happens with Earth 2 Superman on Earth 1 is a pretty direct road to despotism. And it's a direct road to really a more authoritarian expression of his power and the way that he thinks the world should be. But not only that, it also costs the world everybody's lives, right? But at the same time, there is an indictment, a slight indictment of the Earth 1 Superman's outlook, in the sense that he is not able to forestall the crisis if given the chance on the original Earth 2. So it's a good look at both of them. I like how we sort of relive these defining golden and silver age moments in addition to early Byrne stuff, you know, like the first meeting between Batman and Superman and Man of Steel, first meeting between Superman and Lois in that,
and how
same
dramatically
story.
different they are. They're not just
Yeah.
a slight variation. Like I said earlier, they are full on different, but not like dramatically different where it's like, now they're all evil. Like, no, it's a good it's a good change, but not enough to where it seems like it's completely from left field.
Yeah, and I mean, Superman joining the Justice League Elite is kind of shocking, considering what, like, we should probably at some point do Justice League, Joe Kelly's Justice League stuff, and
We'll do everything at one point.
What's so
We'll
funny
do
about
this.
Do
Joe
it all.
Kelly? Look, man, Joe Kelly is a hell of a Superman writer.
He's a solid writer, dude. He wrote some good Spider-Man stuff too. A lot of people don't like.
Oh no, yeah, I know, but just like I don't know how much people talk about his Superman in comparison with like Spider-Man or Deadpool. Like his Superman stuff is very solid, and he wrote one of the most definitive Superman stories of the modern age in Action number 775 with What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. But all of that to say that this ideological conflict that he portrays between the modern vision of Superman and who we always kind of assumed was a paragon in the Golden Age Superman. No, I mean, he's applying a very simplistic view of the world to something that is more complicated than that. And if you try and sweep away the complications without actually, discussing and thinking through all of the moral implications of a simplistic application of morality, you get disaster. This is a pretty blatant rejection of authoritarianism in a way that I find very fascinating, but also just like shocking, cool. It's nice to see Howard Chaykin do some Superman stuff. I don't think I'd ever really seen him draw Superman all that much before I read this.
Chaykin, man.
So yeah, man, I'm glad you enjoyed this, and I'm glad that you thought it was a worthy detour to take.
Yeah, I think. By the way, this picture, I meant to get this panel and blow it up. I forgot to add it to the thing. But if anyone wants to just go and look at this, whoever drew this picture in the middle panel is doing their best Sylvester Stallone Superman.
Yeah, he kind of looks like Sly.
That is Renato Gades. He would actually go on to be the artist on the main Superman title when James Robinson started his run a couple of years after this.
Interesting.
I think he's a fantastic artist. I love it.
And this is not disrespect. I'm just saying he looks like Sly Stallone. I'm glad Mr. Baby
that's
agrees.
cool. Hey, yeah, sure.
Dave Lewis, how you doing? You know what I'm saying? Whatever.
It's like very pastel-y, but there's a lot of shadow work too, which I think
no,
is
for
cool.
sure. Well, there's a page here I really liked a lot, and I think this is where I noticed myself getting into it more was this page specific, like this time when Superman's like, hey Lex, you're gonna I'm gonna save you, and you're gonna live for 25 more years, and you're gonna have to do good things, or I'm gonna let you die. I love this different Superman because it's not just like, oh, I'm evil and he's gonna hurt hitting people. No. This is a Superman who would never do. Like, this is not Superman I know would ever do this.
Correct.
Like, right? Like this is a drastic change, but it's one that you can kind of understand a little bit, like where he's coming from. Again, the genius of whoever orchestrated this whole thing, which I'm assuming is John's. It was really impressive. And also I don't want to say, this goes without saying, obviously Tim Sale is an animal legend icon. Yeah. This was brilliant. And I wanted to stress how brilliant the comic book medium is, because you can do stuff like this, man. Like, how rad is this?
It's
like
brilliant.
This is brilliant. And the medium of comic books, there's so many fun things you can do. And it's so.
Who says Superman can't be experimental, right?
Well, I mean, this could be any character. Like,
well, sure, but I just appreciate that Superman is the vehicle through which a story with so many different kind of thematic aims and a comment on different kinds of morality comes through,
Right. No, you're right. And in that sense, yes, you're absolutely right. I'm just saying that, like, this stuff shows you how the powerful of medium of comic books people just don't either take for granted, or they don't give enough credit because they don't know it happens. And this is, again, it has happened to the Superman comic, which I was not expecting. And when I first got to it, I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But then as I get to like this stuff, I'm like, okay, this is pretty rad. Okay, it's because you're telling the story in a traditional comic book model, but it's like it's in the scrapbook format, and like the word, oh god, it's genius. It's like, yes.
Well, Nico, what is your professional assessment of this story? If you had to profile these two gentlemen, how would you do it?
Mr. Baby, how are you gonna profile these? How are you gonna profile these babies? Huh? How are you gonna profile these babies?
To bring up it would be hard. It would be hard because you do to talk about just the way I digest it is kind of like you both touched on, is that whole Dr. Manhattan thing of I do think it is something that everyone, when you think about, I always find myself doing this whenever I'm finished reading comic books or watch a comic book show or film or animated series, you sometimes joke about, okay, how this would work in the real world. Oh, really Superman is that powerful that he just stop everything and basically make all the wrong stuff happen. Yeah. And while you can think that, and it's definitely a thought, you're right. What the story beautifully shows is that like that moral simplicity, like you said, Chris, it's so much more complex and deeper than that in the world. And you got the Superman fighting for it, and the one who, like you said so wonderfully too, is this take on like authoritarianism is pretty wild. And I do agree with Paul, to go back to something, is it does. And I get the thought that these are so supplemental, and that sometimes if you pack too much of this into the main story, it really starts to not only take control, but you lose other parts of it. But I was serious when I said I will not, if I only go back to read the main series, I'm going to put these three between 5 and 6 too, because as I'm reading this story, there's pieces of it, of course, coming back to me. And I remember being interested in their conflict. But now, I mean, when I closed this, I was so invested in it and so blown away by the way they chose to tell that side of the story. So yeah,
that's a good word, Mr. Baby. Invested is where exactly what I felt like. I'm like, okay, I'm like even more invested in now in Earth 2 Superman and in the story itself. And I didn't love I think it's interesting because I think I love that countdown issue. I didn't love the OMAC project when Wonder Woman, snaps his neck. Though I like that. That was fine. I'm sorry. The OMAC project wasn't is into. I like the countdown issue. The Superman Wonder Woman stuff was cool to kind of give you an idea. I've been really loving Infinite Crisis itself so far after 5 issues. I'm totally into it, and I'm definitely loving what we're reading. I'm glad you're making me read it. I definitely would say that, like, of all the tie-in material we've read, Countdown issue and these are like must reads. Like, I think
I agree.
the one thing I would say, it's like, it kind of sucks. I wish they would have done a better job initially, is incorporate, because I like the idea of Wonder Woman sacrificing Maxwell Lord, or not sacrificing, but killing Maxwell Lord to kind of create that doubt in herself and in heroes in general. I think it's a brilliant idea. I wish they would have incorporated that into the main series somehow a little bit better. Because right now, as I'm reading that, I'm like, oh yeah, like I was reminded by that with the issues of Superman, not the main series. So it's, you know what I mean? Like, I know it's an important aspect of the story too, right? So it is a little, even though it has been a perfect, whatever, I gotta say these issues were fantastic, and like as Mr. Baby said, I'm all in and invested in this now, even more so because of these 3 issues. Even though I love the Countdown issue, and I really liked the Superman Wonder Woman crossover. It was really good, solid stuff. It felt like these 3 issues really cemented like how I think, really how important I think this series, with the story, that the themes that he's talking about of Jeff Johns. And also, I think showing you, I think that Superman is a really interesting character, and there's really cool things you can do with them. And a lot of that plays upon, I think, who you play opposite him, whether it be protagonist, antagonist, or whoever. But those are important things. And I don't think it's any more evident than with the Earth 2 Superman character interacting with him and seeing, again, not just a slightly variation version, but a really ideology of ideals completely the opposite, and not just be like a complete evil person, but someone who's just not exactly the same. But there's those differences are so defining that they are going to come to blows. That is more interesting than just like outright evil.
Well, and he's more
I love that
thought,
too.
and Superman though is also like Superman of Earth 2, not an evil guy, but misguided.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
But it also exemplifies, or at least accentuates, that Superman himself is thoughtful, regardless of the perceptions that are on him as a simplistic character. He's very clearly trying to think things through, and he's trying to think through, not only what is the right thing to do, but also how is my action or inaction on something going to impact things. But you also take into account the journey that we've gone on with him up through this point. I mean, there's a point in these 3 issues where Batman's words about the last time you inspired anyone was when you were dead were reverberating in his ear. And these 3 issues really do seem like a very pivotal point in Superman sort of getting his groove back, in realizing the place that he's supposed to play in terms of moral leadership in the DC universe, and how maybe he wasn't sure if he was thinking about things in too complex a way. But when he's confronted with a mirror version of himself who is thinking about things far too simplistically, to the detriment of an entire world or an entire multiverse, it's sort of a rededication to, no, I am doing things the right way as long as I believe in myself to do them. And what better way to be confronted with that than by literally fighting yourself?
Yeah, no, and again, not just like an evil, like I'm an evil version. It's just like this slightly different thinking.
We see this so much. I feel like this is more relevant now than maybe any other time before, because we see this all the time in modern society. 2 people
I was just
who
gonna say the
are
same thing.
pretty good, but who approach things from a diametrically opposed worldview. Their goodness is derived from 2 different areas.
And how it drives into
But
blows.
it drives them to blood. It literally does.
Yeah.
But as we see at the end of Infinite Crisis number 5, Superman of Earth 2 is not incapable of looking beyond the pain that he is causing.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the key separation. Once we get back into the main series, when you have the context of this and these experiences happening over the course of this fight, but you bring it back in, if you're from this Earth, it can't be perfect, because a perfect Earth doesn't need a Superman.
God, that's
even that
freaking great line, dude.
with the Golden Age Superman to the point that nothing else did. And that's when things start to become clearer for him. And
I'm sorry, Chris. I apologize. Leave it on this page for me. what I was going to say, and to kind of wrap this up as we're running a little bit late, which this is perfect. Again, the classic comic book medium here. This is the power of knowing your page when you're a writer. And this is not like mind blowing stuff here, but I just want to make sure people realize when you're reading this page, it's purposefully orchestrated this way to have Superman have that look on the very end of this page. It's all built up to earn that last panel to be like, damn, to have that you resonate. And again, that is purposeful because a lazy writer would have maybe had that panel like midway or like towards like the third panel of the last and have like Superman be like saying like, come on, friend, let's go do this together. And then like, turn the page. No, you purposely leave it on him hitting him and realizing at the very end. And this is a writer and an artist knowing how to make an emotionally impactful page of a layout. And I want people to realize that when they read this stuff, this is what the comic medium can do in a very simplistic way, but it's an emotionally gratifying and I think beautiful way that the medium people just take for granted. Don't take this stuff for granted, man. This is a beautifully written page that ends and hits you in the gut the right way because it's orchestrated that way. So I want to end on that for myself. So I'm good. These are people, go read these comics, all these comics. These are 1000%, Teen Titans. If you guys don't want to read it, I get it. It's definitely worth checking out. I think still, though, I would say these are the Superman issues that we're talking about. And Chris, you want to go ahead and read them out loud. That way people know. Go read these issues. If you're reading Infinite Crisis, these are must reads. Just read them. You won't regret it.
Yeah, so just a quick reminder, the issues that we've talked about today: Teen Titans Volume 3, number 32, Teen Titans Volume 3, Annual, number 1, Infinite Crisis, number 5. This is actually cover B by George Perez and cover A by Jim Lee.
Jim Lee's good, but Perez, yeah.
We didn't talk about Jaime. Jaime made his first appearance. In fact, he makes this one hard to find, but there's a lot to get through. And I think Superman deserves the lion's share of the
he's only in it for like one page.
Yeah, I mean he becomes who he's supposed to be in it, but it's a comparatively smaller part of this. And then the 3 tie-in issues that expound on the fight: Superman Volume 2, number 226, Action Comics number 836, Volume 1. I guess there's 3 volumes of Action Comics technically now. And then Adventures of Superman number 649. So those are all it. And then Infinite Crisis number 5, it actually ends with, Alexander Luthor has revealed himself as the key problem that leads to the rebirth of the multiverse, the infinite multiverse. And Dick Grayson sent out a call, and he needs someone to answer it, and only one person comes. So we are going to be touching on what happens with them before we circle back into the final 2 issues of the main series. The Flashes thought they had Superboy Prime imprisoned in the Speed Force, but lo and behold, little boy Blue is back, and he's mad. So lots of stuff to get through. Damn. But Nico, why don't you give us your final thoughts, how all of these things come together to close us out?
Oh, it's great stuff. It's great stuff. It has only added to my memory of the story, but has just aged and added to the story just like fine wine. And what's cool is I've barely read any physical Superman issues themselves, and to read these 3 and the quality of these 3 and the story it tells, I'm very glad I did. And what I will say, what I'll close on is it is shaping up to be, with this substance we added on the side from you, Chris, it is turning into some of my favorite DC comic stuff I've ever read, and to talk about it with you guys each time is just a treat.
Well, that makes me very happy.
No, and I'll just one last thing too. And again, Papa Nick, we missed you. We'll get. I can't wait to get his quick 5-minute take on these issues. I definitely want to hear what you have to say about these Superman comics specifically. So, Papa Nick, if you're listening, you're not exempt. We're gonna get your take on these comics yet. So just at least these three, and obviously issue 5 because it's the bigger story. But yeah, I think these are I'm really glad you made me read these comics, Chris. And I don't say that lightly, because I would not say that if I didn't mean it.
No, you're saying it through gritted teeth and everything. It's great.
I'm not saying through gritted teeth. But if I was, I'd be like,
yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah,
so,
true enough. Well, so before we actually close out,
please, explain what the next reading is.
We've got one part left in this binge. It was difficult for me to boil things down, but I tried to do it as best as I possibly could. So the next time we get together to finish off Infinite Crisis, Teen Titans Volume 3, number 33, what are Connor and Dick Grayson doing together? We will find out in that issue. Infinite Crisis Secret Files and Origins number 1. This is the only one on this list that is not on DC Universe Infinite, nor does it seem to be available to purchase electronically anywhere. So you will have to go into your back issue bins to find it.
Back issue bins.
Yeah, I cracked mine open. Oh man, it was good to open. It was, sometimes I don't go there.
I'm loving you're doing that, man. I'm glad you're doing it.
No, it's great. It's great. So the story in that issue is called Heaven, and it fills in what happens to the multiversal exiles between the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths and the beginning of Infinite Crisis, when they start to make their influence felt and they start affecting things, particularly Superboy Prime. It is written by Marv Wolfman. So the man himself comes back, and it's penciled by Dan Jurgens with inks by Jerry Ordway, I believe. So a kind of important story, I think, to sort of round everything out. And then we will finish off the series with Infinite Crisis number 6 and number 7 and see how all of this stuff comes together and if it can stick the landing.
And we're not done, because we've got New 52 right afterwards.
52.
So, I mean,
not New 52.
You and me, yeah, 52. Sorry, 52. And that's something I am been waiting to read, because I've heard so many from you, from everyone, and we're gonna hopefully get not just Papa Nick and Mr. Baby in this. We'll hopefully get Laura involved in this. Some special nights. We're gonna bring the whole kit and caboodle for 52. Javi's gonna get on that SH. Like, I mean, it's gonna be a binge. It's gonna be a barn burner when we get to 52. It feels like. So
yeah. So with 52, obviously went for 52 issues. So we're gonna be splitting it up into 4 parts. So when we do get to that, 52 number 1 through 13. It sounds like a lot, but I remember reading this series when it was coming out, and I was surprised at how addictive it was. It was just as good, maybe better, than any TV show that I was watching at the time. So it'll be really fascinating.
Yeah, I have no doubt in that. I have no doubt. I'm excited. I've got the 4 volumes. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So, really quickly, some housekeeping. Next Tuesday, I'm still trying to figure it out, but we are going to have, I'm kind of excited, because I'm trying to pare down the reading for it. Is going to be a Wakanda Forever MCU required reading. For that, it kind of snuck up on me. I'm like, oh crap, I haven't done anything for She-Hulk or With My Night, Wakanda Forever. I'm too ramped up for that. I've got a couple of things in the fire that I'm trying to figure out for reading material, but me and Chris will iron it out and have some really essential stuff that I think. There's one story, Chris, that I'm thinking we'll do the one you told me about, and I think the one that I am eyeing on right now, it's only 3 issues. But I think it could be pivotal to it kind of leads to another bigger story eventually. But I think, to me, this is like the precursor of what they're really going to be doing in the MCU after Multiverse Saga. So I'm excited. So yeah, next Tuesday will be Wakanda Forever MCU required reading. So get your popcorn ready. It's going to be a lot of fun. So
excellent.
I'm here. I'm done.
Well, thank you, everybody, for taking a look at this whenever you did, whether you joined us live or if you're joining us later. Nico, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can follow me everywhere at Nico Caruso. It's on the screen. Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. I also do film reviews on TikTok at Nico Knows Film. I have 3 main podcasts I do in addition to appearing on the Comic Binge. We got The Vigilante 1939.
You're part of the crew. Let's just say 4. Just say 4. Because you're part of the team. You're part of the family. You're part of the family.
To say that,
Mr. Baby,
it's a genuine smile, sir.
I know.
Thank you, my friend.
You can say 4. You're part of the you're part of the family. Anyway,
well,
I digress. I'm sorry. inside.
In addition to my time at the Comic Binge, you could find me at a show called The Vigilante 1939, the Italian Spider-Man Coalition, or Right Between the Eyes of Kiss podcast. All those are present on my Twitter page. Go follow me, Twitter, TikTok, all those shows. A lot of diversity in there, a lot of different topics, and catch me here sometimes twice a month.
Excellent. Paul, where can people find you if they want to?
If they want to find me while Twitter's still around and breathing.
Yeah, for now.
For now. Which I don't know, that's a whole thing, a different thing. But no,
who's getting verified here?
Yeah, I'm getting verified. Jokes on them. I never cared about being verified then. Don't care about it now. So
I care about it less now.
Yeah, exactly. Seems even more worthless. Anyway, you can find me on Twitter at Herman22 with 2 N's, aka Pete. Like that's the main parts where I'm at. And you can also follow Comic Binge on Twitter. It's Binge Comic. Instagram, follow us there and go please like, subscribe, all that jazz. We really appreciate everyone coming on there. And again, just trying to just move the power of the comic books. So let's do it.
Read more comics.